believe. I think I need a replay. Take a chance with me. I make it look easy. Trust and follow me. Oh, nah, 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 nah. Someone pitch me, I'm dreaming. Oh, nah, nah. You so cold, girl, I'm freezing. Oh, nah, nah. Yeah, I'm here, but don't use me. Oh, nah, nah. Hold me tight, but don't bruise me. Yeah, how am I supposed to keep up with your fly? You know you're special. Met you and now I regret every girl that I met before you. It's not often I don't take the lead, but girl, tonight I'm with you. Let's make moments last forever falling. I can't wait to show you. This could be so sweet. Let's get a little cheesecake. Feels like make-believe. I think I need a replay. Take a chance with me. I make it look easy. Trust and follow me. Oh, nah, nah, nah. I'm not afraid to tell the truth. I heard it make you free. I write a poem, I use every letter from A to Z. I can never box my love, I gotta let it out. I'm that fairy tale type of prince that you read.
90.7 WTCC FM. My name is D.Moss, and this is Monday Night Live. I'm on my man, the big dude. What's his name again?
Mr. Robert Jones.
All right. So you're gonna jump right into it. Anything gonna get off your chest, man?
No.
You always got something insightful to drop, man. Work with me here.
There's a lot of stuff going on. Recently, there was a massacre up in Buffalo, and once I saw that the spokesperson that was talking was black, I knew the con game was on. It's too often that we see that, whenever there's something to articulate or something to share, a tragedy or something like that goes out to the media, they put a black face on there thinking that it's going to make it better, thinking that it's going to placate the community, and it's not. Actually, what you're doing is you're really telling on yourself. Now, I'm not saying that's happening in every situation, every scenario, but too many scenarios it's happening. Too many scenarios. But it also goes to prove, we've had people on before about getting your permit to carry. The kid had body armor on, but people are prone to run away when you're shooting back at them.
Well, there was a brother who shot back at him.
Yeah.
But dude came, he had his government sanctioned, body armor on. So dude shot him, but it didn't impact him at all. And then he turned fire and he killed the brother.
Yeah.
But again, cats definitely need to. Well, they told me I was wrong for saying grab the guns, but I'm just saying. The mayor said enough of that. You're fired.
That was crazy.
You couldn't do that. But the reality is, when you have a president, even you look at Dominic Sarno and how he, applauded the efforts of what's my man, the little white murderer, Rittenhouse.
Kyle Rittenhouse. Yeah. They call him the Kyle Rittenhouse effect.
Trump, all of them, everybody applauded this dude, man. They raised millions of dollars for him. So I think it's more than just, grabbing your guns and shooting back. I think it's more important that we know exactly what we up against.
But you know what? We talked about this before, Daryl, and we're not going to put the other people's names in the room. We know what we're up against. We've dealt with it. We see it, but it's like we can't walk around with ignorant.
You might see it, but again, you seen the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
You seen the Matrix?
Of course.
Okay. Remember that scene where dude said, "I'm going to continue to eat that steak and potatoes, although I know it's not steak and potatoes."
Yeah.
Then we got the folks. This is the dude who knew what was happening, but he still wanted to go back to the comfort of ignorance. Yeah. Then we had the folks who just had no clue. So tonight we have a guest on with us.
Yes.
And since we went there, let's talk about that.
Segue.
Let's talk about that Matrix. Let's talk about that Black Matrix. We have Brother Franklin Jones on with us.
But before we get into that,
Mr.
Jones, and it's easy for me to say that. Won't you tell our listeners a little bit something about yourself, your background? What kind of inspires you to write this book before Black Matrix?
First, I'd like to thank you both for having me on your program. It's an honor to be here. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank Brother Gary Porter, also known as Brother Gibb, for connecting us. I really appreciate him for doing that. My background starts with the military. I'm a combat veteran soldier, and I served in Iraq. This is where I started studying social engineering, psychological warfare. I was a part of the ground troops that went into Iraq. I was an infantry soldier. While there, I made contact with PSYOPs units, psychological operation units. Being an infantry squad leader at the time, I started questioning the commanders of the PSYOPs unit. I was asking what was their mission there, what were they doing? And they explained to me that while we were able to defeat the Iraqis with our military might, we were not able to capture their minds. So the PSYOPs unit came there to capture their minds. And what they did was we took over their media. We took over all their media, their publications, their television, and we started feeding them propaganda. America also changed their curriculums in their school and started feeding them propaganda to socialize their minds. So while witnessing this firsthand, it was clear to me that this was exactly what had been done to we Africans. It was the same social engineering to our minds that we were doing to Iraq. Ever since then, I've been studying more and more about psychological warfare, how we socialize the minds of our people to think in ways that benefit the dominant society. Now, when I speak, I go against a lot of the disinformation that's in our community because we are drowning in disinformation. So when I speak today, I'm going to destroy many myths that our people believe, but I will destroy those myths presenting facts, and then I will show the truth of our condition. The truth of our condition has nothing to do with a fictional Bible that was brutally beaten into the minds of our ancestors, which was written by immoral Romans that routinely engaged in massive orgies and death sports, and they continued this practice even after writing the Bible. Our plight has nothing to do with that. Our plight has nothing to do with a slave syndrome myth, which presents what would be the least effective method used for controlling a generation of people. We also know that we're not being controlled by slave syndrome because when experts studied the letter, they found modern words in it, proving that it was not written in the 1700s. It was a modern document. We also know that it was written by a Dr. Ashina, who recently died in February. He confirmed that he was the one who wrote it. So the goal here is to elevate the minds of our people above biblical myth, slave syndrome, and we must understand that there are social sciences. There are social sciences that are being used for maintaining the long-term dominance of white people, and there are social sciences that are being used for the long-term oppression of Black people. I'm also going to demonstrate today through speaking another fact that shows that our condition has nothing to do with slavery. The fact that we call ourselves niggers and bitches, hoes.
We can't. I can't use that language.
I'm sorry. The fact that we use the derogatory term to describe ourselves, wear long weaves. When you look at the 1960s, we were declaring Black is pride, Black is beautiful. We were calling ourselves brothers and sisters. I'm going to demonstrate that the fact that we are more divided today, we are more backwards today than we were during the 1960s is proof that our condition is not connected to slavery. If our condition was connected to slavery, we would have been far worse during the 60s, and we've been better today because our current generation is further removed from the 60s. Fact that we are...
Can I interrupt you for a second? So when you talk about current generation, I think it's important because you're throwing a lot of information heavy, and we're in a generation and we're in a climate where people just read headlines.
I know.
So I know you're going to share some vital information today, but if you can succinctly just kind of just piece it together in little nuggets so people can digest it and understand it, because for some reason in today's society and in today's culture, our attention span is probably like 3 seconds.
Yes.
Or less. Does that make sense?
I was merely laying out the topics that I will be bringing forward, but I will break them down as we go on. I will discuss why we now call ourselves by the N-word, how that came about. how we tend to believe that we made it our own word, and we did not. We call ourselves that word because due to the science known as media social engineering, which I will discuss as we go further.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well,
One of the things that, as I was listening to you, I think people kind of dismiss the word propaganda. I think they associate that word with warfare, wartime. I remember World War II when Germany was throwing pamphlets out from the bombers, letting them know, hey, we're going to bomb you, England, tomorrow at so and so. Take cover. So, or the media sending out false information on victories or defeats. So when you hear the term propaganda,
Yes.
you explain to the people who are listening how that notion, how that tool is used in everyday life. It's just not wartime. It's not a war.
but I think that's what he's going to break down.
Oh, okay.
All those variables that he threw down as he broke down his framework, it all breaks down social engineering.
Okay.
It's the same thing. So he's going to break it down. So I think there's a process to it. And in all fairness, I know there are a lot of people who have no idea. People, imply. But I think this is going to be the first time we actually have somebody who's going to break it down.
Right.
So with that being said, bro,
Break it down.
Take the mic.
I'd like to start where people function based upon narratives.
Mm-hmm.
People do not function based upon facts. They function based upon narratives. Therefore, those who control the narrative that are fed into a society literally control the interpretation of reality. I'm going to give an example of how people function based upon narratives. And I'm also going to tie into propaganda. Let us say, as we know, there are those elites, those in power, they have an agenda to go to war against Iraq or Iran or some Middle Eastern country. Let's say the objective is for oil or something that protects the interests of our nation. You're not going to present that true narrative to the public. You're not going to present that narrative to the soldiers because the soldiers were reluctant to go to war to fight for oil. So those in power creates a narrative. The narrative is always that we're righting a wrong, that we are the heroes and they're the bad guys. They create the narrative, impose the narrative upon the soldiers. The soldier accepts the narrative is true, then he will go to other countries and kill people based upon the narrative. Many soldiers will lay down their lives based upon the narratives. Now, it doesn't matter if the narrative is untrue. All that matters is that the soldiers believe the narratives. We go and we function based upon narratives. Likewise, on the civilian sector, people also function based upon the narratives they received about them. There was a situation that many of us don't realize. All narratives about Black people here in the U.S. are controlled exclusively by the white society. They tell us what to believe about ourselves, and they condition us not to question them, and we function based upon their narratives. That's how they control us.
Mm-hmm.
They create negative narratives. Now, here's why this system is in place, and the system that I'm referring to was developed in 1968. Now, if you remember during the 1960s, we had unprecedented unified Black protests. African Americans confront the system of white supremacy on every front, through civil disobedient means, through militant means, through Black lawyers arguing our case for equality in America's highest courts. Therefore, African Americans has confronted white racism more than any group in the U.S. history. This is a narrative we don't hear about. So in 1968, Lyndon B. Johnson formed a commission called the Kerner Commission to study the problem, okay? Now, when you read about it, you want to see the narrative that they present to you. Now, the goal was to find the problem and find ways to eliminate the problems. Also, they had to find the goal was to find our strengths and our weakness, and then attack our strengths unrelentingly, and then exploit our weakness. They found that our strength was Black unity, so they had to attack Black unity. They found that our weakness was the fact that we were stripped of our identity and culture during the enslavement of our ancestors, and they found a way to exploit that. Now, they also determined that the factor for the unprecedented Black protest was blatant white racism. So they realized that they had to abandon their uses of blatant white racism and develop covert methods that are not easily recognized by the Black masses. You see, racism prevails best when the Black masses don't recognize it. So they decided to abandon the blatant segregation method. They also determined that a core factor was an elevated and unifying Black self-esteem brought on by the emergence of the Black Pride movement. So they also determined they had to lower the collective self-esteem of the Black masses. And there's something else they learned. They learned that while the white society, through their weaponry advantages of guns and cannons, were able to invade and enslave Africans, they could not win our loyalty unless they manipulate our minds to think in ways that benefits the white society. Because here is what they learned. Whenever people are oppressed for long terms, their collective aggressions toward their oppressors will continue to grow until acts of rebellion and retribution becomes inevitable. This is an inherent part within the human condition, and this is what was happening during the 1960s. So
let me stop you for a second. Because we're on live radio, I'm gonna need you to slow down just a little bit.
Sorry,
if we were in a lecture hall, we'd be perfect. But because we're on the radio, we gotta slow it down because people are driving, people are doing what they do. We want to make sure that everybody can fully digest what you're saying. So we gotta break it down and then save some time so we can get people asking some questions about some of the things we're saying as well. Cool,
great, fantastic. I'm gonna ask you to just critically think for a minute before I go on.
Okay.
Have you noticed that virtually all narratives that we receive from the white society about us are negative? Do you not see how cartoonishly unrealistic that is? Or have you ever noticed that virtually all narratives that we receive that makes any comparison between blacks and whites tend to favor whites over us? This is also cartoonishly unrealistic, but it's actually propaganda, okay? They determined that our Black protest was a result of an elevated, unifying Black collective self-esteem. So they determined that they could subdue and reduce our self-esteem by continually inundating us with fraudulent, negative narratives about ourselves. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give you, I'm going to slow down, give you a demonstration of how people function based upon narratives. When people constantly receive positive narratives about themselves, this elevates their self-esteem. This unifies them. They function based upon the narratives, even though the narratives are untrue. Most people respond the same way because they've all received the same narratives. However, when people receive negative narratives about themselves, the exact opposite happens. They become demoralized and resentful. Now, I'm going to give an example, an illustrated example. Imagine, if you would, there is a ship out at sea, and on the ship is a well-functioning ship, and on the crew, there's a crew, and they're being followed by a second ship. And the second ship is in control of all of the narrative that are fed into the first ship. And they're constantly bombarding the crew with negative narratives about themselves. They are telling them that their ship is slowly sinking, not seaworthy, that their crew is incompetent, that their ship is lost, that the mutiny is being planned. With time, the group receiving the negative narratives about themselves become besieged by the negative narrative, and they start resenting their fellow crew members. Some would become there's something called what you call identity dissociation. When the pain from the humiliation becomes so great, you want to separate from your own racial group. These are the people that we tend to call sellouts in code. The people on the ship, some may dive off of the ship and swim towards the taunting ship, believing it's better. Now, this system of control, it utilizes the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of Black people. Now, once a program belief has been embedded into the human mind, the individual then only notices those incidents that appears to confirm the belief and becomes psychologically blinded from noticing the greater amount of evidence refuting it. This is why many Black people insist that they've confirmed their negative assessment of their racial group based upon their own experiences, although they've in fact not. And how do I know they've in fact not? Because it is not humanly possible to assess the collective state of millions of people based upon any one individual experience. I will give you an example. A Black woman might stand up today and says, Black men are the worst. I can prove they're the worst because I've had bad experiences. But let's critically think. Let's look at facts. The average person has 3 bad relationships. Why is it tend to be 3? Because after we have been hurt, we tend to become more picky in our choices. So the highest would be 3 to 4. So therefore, if you've had 3 bad relationships, there's no way you can validate your assessment that Black men are the worst. But you have Black men insist that Black women are the worst, and Black women insist that Black men are the worst because they've been bombarded with propaganda. When they constantly use propaganda and they experience their negative assessment, it mentally enslaves them, and they will insist that their perception is true, although it's not. I'll give you an example that we both know. Many Black women believe that Black men are running in droves to marry white women, and they insist that it's true. And you tell them that it's not true, and they'll argue, tell you it's true. Because when they go out, they keep seeing these mixed couples. But according to the U.S. Census, 86.5% of African-American husbands are married to Black women. Only 7% are married to white women. It's actually Asian women who marry at the highest rate outside their race at 26%. We are functioning based upon false narratives, and our ignorance of this, how the social science work, is the oppressor's greatest weapon. The white society exploits its monopoly over information to shape our minds to think in ways that serve the white society. It's actually a very common practice, but we don't hear about it because they don't teach us in our schools. You won't see this in the media. It's called socialize. Socialize is
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
So you were laying down the framework, and you were laying down like the rationale and the history and how that tool's used. What are some of the ways as a society, well, what are some of the ways individually we can insulate ourselves from being affected by that propaganda? And what are some of the ways as a community we can insulate and ballast ourselves against that disinformation and that narrative?
That's what I was going to do. I was going to break it down and show you how we fight it. But since you do it, I'm going to tell you right now.
Perfect.
Now, it's going to sound, I don't want to oversimplify this, but I'm going to use a story. We Africans, we tell stories, and the story will convey the point. When people know better, they do better. When people become aware, when people gain a proper understanding of their plight and condition, they develop the proper remedies. Now, we have been tricked by the white society to believe that everyone's entitled to their own truths. But this is untrue. If you're not functioning based upon the truth, you're functioning based upon lies. And while usually people have a right to believe whatever they choose to believe, the oppressed must gain an accurate understanding of their plight and condition, because if our understanding is flawed, all remedies that will stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. Now, to answer that question, to my story, imagine, if you would, that there's an African village. And on this African village, these white Europeans came to Africa, and the Africans allowed them to settle on land 10 miles to their left. Now, let's say these Europeans want the land that the Africans on, because it's a beachfront land. So the Europeans poisoned the well, the Africans' well. Not being aware of their well was poisoned, the Africans in the village will make assumptions. They will say that they will think they're cursed. They would make all sorts of superstitions why they're sick and why they're dying. However, once they are given the proper information that the well has been poisoned, the proper information expands their understanding, and that expanded radius will produce proper remedies. The first thing they will do, they will stop drinking water from the well. They're functioning based upon the proper information. They will dig a new well. And they will also remove those people who poison their well. My point is, we must educate our people to understand propaganda and social engineering.
Absolutely.
Go on.
No. I was agreeing. I said absolutely.
Yes, we have been socialized to trust the white society when the facts are the white society has never earned the blind trust of Black people.
Yep.
Also, the white society's depiction of Black people has never been a true one throughout history. We have been socialized to see the white society as the authority of all that's true. Now, how is this possible? Because people are very much like computers, regardless of how intelligent people are.
It's absolutely true. I'm thinking of a little. Did y'all hear that little nursery rhyme? I know back when I was a kid, it's like if you white, you right. If you brown, you down. If you yellow, you mellow. If you black, get back. Yes. Little things. When you watch TV shows, the cartoons, you're absolutely right. The way they could completely control every media mechanism, and they still do. To this day, we talk about the rappers and their use of the N word and the use of the B word and all that stuff, and we blame the rappers, not realizing that the people who actually control those hip hop artists, and we're saying they're just being creatives, distributors. The people who control those narratives that they're espousing, those are white folks. Those are old white and Jewish men who control, the record, the music industry. They control the movie industry. So we're blaming the employees. And I've said this before, and we refuse to look at the employers and hold them accountable. We learned that with the NFL when Colin and those guys took a knee, and those white football the white owners, basically they do a narrative out there. And the rest of the white world followed right behind them, and we bought into it too. We had a president that condoned it. Here locally, we had a mayor that condoned it. So when you talk about narrative, man, that's why I'm happy you're on. Thank you, Brother Gary, my brother Gary Porter. I appreciate you for making this connection, because people need to understand the programming. And Franklin, I'm going to tell you this. Over the last couple of weeks, there have been a lot of Negroes who have been extremely critical of this radio show because they said I'm allowing other people to exploit my platform to espouse views similar to your own. So when we talk about narrative, it gets to the point when we start to counter that information, the folks who are gonna fight us first are the folks who look just like us. So when I say, please slow it down so that everybody can get it, I want to make sure that our listening audience completely understands that they're being bombarded with millions upon millions of audio and visual images on a daily basis.
Visual, sensory, and to amplify what Daryl's saying about the Negroes, that shows you how old he is. Meritorious manumissions comes to mind.
It wasn't a compliment.
Meritorious manumission comes to mind back where you would reward Black people for telling on other Black people. So, you've got people who are essentially mascots that will try to elevate themselves, but at the same time destroying the community while doing so. And in fact, they're elevating themselves short term, because none of that elevation is on anything that's long term.
But again, we're blaming, we're pointing fingers at the folks who are programmed, and we're still not looking at the programmer. I look at Margaret Sanger and the eugenics, part of the eugenics movement back in the early 1920s. Yeah. Early teens, 1920s, whatever. And it's kind of like first group of people they went to push their message of indoctrination as they attempted to control the world's population. Well, Negro leaders, the entertainers, and they gave everybody the script. And to this day, it's still happening. So when the brother talks about, social engineering, man, they got this bad boy down to an art form. Actually, the C3 policing unit the policing model that we use here is based on what them brothers did down in Iraq. They would land, they would earn the trust of the people, make the people feel as if they're empowered and that they have a voice, not even realize that they're being controlled and manipulated the whole time. It's kind of like Jeff Shafrida and the affiliated chamber telling us, discard the association. We'll give you a seat at the table. Stop doing what you're doing. Join us. We're going to give you 2 seats. Won't make a difference. You won't control anything anyways. And people go for it. So I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent.
I mean, we didn't go for it, but it just shows just the level of disrespect that they just think that we're just going to roll over for crumbs.
But it's not even a level of disrespect. It's a level of entitlement. It's that cultural arrogance. And they've been doing it as the brother is breaking it down. We minimize it when we say Arrogance. It's kind of like, nah, man, there's a sense of entitlement because they know that we're going for it. We are completely from top to bottom. They got it. So when we hear a brother like Franklin, espousing these views and sharing this information, the first thing folks are going to do is question his credibility and say, so where'd you go to school? But, bro, I need you to finish breaking this down. Don't worry about where you go to school. I just do that as an example. Finish breaking it down, man.
Now, Brother Robert Jones just said something. I'm going to say something. What you just said, you mentioned how the football players were treated when they protested, how they were vilified. That's a social science. That's called massive gaslighting warfare. When you mentioned the rap industry, how the rap industry has turned negative, that's a social science called negative media social engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, then you discuss the position that the whites take. I'm going to clarify that for you. Although all white nations secretly publicly professes equality for all citizens, in reality, they are all unrelentingly committed to the preservation of their nation's white dominance. This is a fact. They're all that.
Absolutely. No question. No fear. No.
And there's also an immense fear of massive unified Black retribution that exists among those white nations that have brutally oppressed Africans for 500 years. Now, this combined fear of retribution and this commitment to maintaining white dominance from their position necessitates that they deploy psychological warfare against Black people. Mm-hmm. That's how they justify their position, maintaining their white dominance. And they say that it is the duty of the government to protect the status quo from any uprising revolt that may rise up among the oppressed population. So it's considered a science. It's considered for the better interest of the nation. Now, when you talked about the rap industry for a second, we talked
music industry, period.
Yes, yep. The ruling elites perceive rap artists as ignorant buffoons that they secretly exploit and use them to negatively steer the Black culture and vilify the Black culture. Our culture is being negatively steered through media manipulation. Many people believe that the media reflects our reality, but the truth is we most often imitate how we see ourselves depicted in the media. Many people become those derogatory media depictions of themselves that they accept as being their reality. Therefore, those who control the people's media images control their culture.
Yeah.
And our culture, our media images are controlled by the white society. It is the white society who tells us how we're supposed to dress, how we're supposed to talk. It was the white society. Now, during the 1960s, they steered us away from the Black Pride movement. Social science also determined, as we know, the 1960s, I'm old enough to know this. We know that today, many African Americans, we say Africans don't like us, and I'm not an African. We always many narratives. But during the 1960s, African Americans, many of us, we embraced our African heritage. We started wearing dashikis, giving ourselves African names. During the 1930s, when Ethiopia was at war with Italy, many African Americans signed up to go to fight in defense of Ethiopia, saying it was their duties to defend Mother Africa. The United States State Department blocked those African Americans from going, but allowed white Italian Americans to go and fight and defend Italy.
Right.
And during the 1960s, when they studied us, they also recognized that the African Americans had developed an allegiance towards Africa that hindered our patriotism and allegiance toward the U.S. Yep. So they realized that they had to erode our allegiance to Africa. And they did this by denigrating the image of Africa. So by constantly bombarding us with, we know this, a team would fly into Africa, land in a beautiful city, get on a rental vehicle and drive miles out to the poorest part of Africa and film that image and show it. This is Africa. Now, many people don't understand how that benefits the system of white supremacy. When Black people...
I think they understand it.
Yeah, we keep seeing the negative image. What happened?
They understand it.
Yes, it makes us perceive our enslavement as being more of a rescue mission. It makes us feel indebted to the white society, and it prevents us from demanding the reparation we're still owed. Many people don't recognize whenever the oppressed starts thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to, it's always by deliberate design.
Right.
We also know that during the administration of Jimmy Carter, Zabriskie, a presidential advisor of political science, said everything must be done to prevent African Americans, Native Africans, and Africans throughout the diaspora from unifying. Yeah. So they continually, they negatively depict our images. Now, for example, you ever notice when many Africans come to this country, they come to this country looking down at African Americans. Many do, it happens. And sometimes I've met Africans who feel they have more in common with white Americans than the African Americans. Mm-hmm. I know Africans who don't want their children to marry African Americans. Mm-hmm. So then we ask ourselves, how is it that they come to the country with negative views of African Americans? It's because the image of African Americans that's being shown to the world is an image that portrays us as buffoons and criminals. Just as the image of Africans that we see shows them as warlords and evil, the white society vilifies our images and it keeps us divided.
Absolutely.
Our people have to become cognizant that our enemies are controlling the information that's fed into our minds.
And until we start controlling our own media,
yes,
and pushing our own narrative, during the 1960s, during the peak of the civil rights movement, you're right, there was a cultural movement going on. People have no idea how many people actually returned to, began to revisit that Yoruba culture all across the country. People have no idea that there was two movements, and the media put more of an emphasis on the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement was all about integrating and assimilating into white America. And by doing that, it showed, the message basically was, if my son is blessed enough to sit next to this little white boy, this little white girl here, my son, then some of them may rub off on my son. That was the messaging, the underlying message. But at the same time, when you've seen all them cats, there's a community down in South Carolina that also started in the 1960s. It's a Yoruba community. And it wasn't just happening here. It was happening in Brazil. I know you mentioned Venezuela earlier. Venezuela. It was happening all across the diaspora. Folks, that Back to Africa movement, it wasn't just about returning to Africa. It was also about embracing an African mindset, decolonizing their mind. When the brother who created Kwanzaa, we look at the beef between them and the Panthers and similar groups. One was saying, we're going to be respected by white people. We want their acceptance. The other one was saying, we need to create an Africanized community here in the States if we're going to do this. There was also an attempt by some Afro-culturalists who were looking to take over 6 states using guns and going to war against America during the 1960s. Nobody talks about that. No, it's like people talk about the Seminole War, not realizing Seminole is really just a runaway. And they have no idea that the Gullah tribes beat America twice in 2 wars until Andrew Jackson and his folks manipulated them. That's another whole story. So as you talk about all that, a lot of this stuff, kicked off way in the 1800s, all the negative depictions of black folks. 10 little N girls. If anybody knows the story, the 10 little nigger girls. Yeah. Remember the brother had the art exhibit. That stuff was real. The textbooks, the history books. So if you could talk a little bit about, when we talk about schooling, we're always complaining that the system is broke. There's nothing wrong with the system. The system is perfect. So can you talk a little bit about the manipulation that our children undergo in the school system as you talk about social engineering?
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. We agree. Many of us says, why are we learning more Black affirming facts on social media from each other than we do so within our schools? We know this to be a fact, and we say, why? But we're ignorant why. It's a social science. I will explain. In order for a dominant society to maintain their position of dominance over the subordinate population, they must condition the subordinate population to accept their subordinate status within the society. This is achieved by denying the subordinate population of a racially affirming curriculum. When the subordinate population is denied a racially affirming curriculum, this psychologically conditions them to accept their subordinate status. Now, you see how there's a war against our minds and we are ignorant of it? We are we take our children into the schools, and all we care about is, are you getting A's and B's? But we're not aware of the social science that's embedded within the curriculum. Many of our children graduate from high school believing that we've invented nothing. Many people, even here now, many of our children, when they're taught that their history began with slavery.
High school.
Imagine, so they're taught that we were ignorant and backwards, but the facts are this. The world's oldest university we know is in Africa. The world's largest man-made structure, bigger than the Great Wall of China, which is in the Guinness World Record, is in Africa. Our people don't recognize the oldest encyclopedia, the oldest writings, the oldest art. We are functioning based upon false narratives. When we say the Matrix, our perception of reality is an elaborate white deception. You see, the basic tool to distort reality is to merely distort the narratives. People rarely function based upon facts. They function based upon the narratives. And white social scientists determined a long time ago, in order for the white society to maintain its dominance, the narratives that are fed into a society must exalt the white society and marginalizes black people. Social science describes this as instilling a value system into the collective minds of the subordinate population that makes us adhere to the authority of the dominant culture. There's a war against our minds. I'll give you an example how our minds hijack, we function based upon narratives. Every time I walk in there, I turn the light on. Now, if in my mind, I believe that Thomas Edison is the reason why I have a light bulb, so therefore white superiority is constantly being reaffirmed into my mind, constantly reaffirmed, thank the white man, thank the white man. But here's the reality, here's the facts. We know that when Thomas Edison patented his light bulb, there was an African-American working on his light bulb at the exact same time. He didn't take Thomas Edison's own and changed it. He was working on his own. Yes, Thomas Edison
invented the bulb that goes around the filament that actually lights up.
Yeah, let the people hear a full narrative.
Go for
Thomas
it.
Edison went and patented his light bulb first. Now, here are the facts. No companies purchased it. No companies mass produced it because white companies deemed it wasn't efficient enough for mass production. It lit very dimly. It only lasted a few minutes. However, the light bulb that was purchased, mass produced, and its inventor was dispatched around the world to oversee its installation was an African American, like you said, Louis Latimer. But so you see, our society is functioning based upon distorted narratives. Remember when people says go to Africa, but we also know that when Marcus Garvey was doing his moving back to Africa, the FBI targeted him, got him on mail fraud, threw in prison, deported him to Jamaica, and banned him from returning to the U.S. Okay, why? You know why? Because after slavery, here's a narrative they won't teach you in your history books. After slavery, in the 80 years following slavery, African Americans submitted 726 invention patterns to the U.S. Patent Office. 726 from a people who were enslaved and denied an education. And that number more than doubled those submitted by Europeans. Also, even today, the U.S. Patent Office is disproportionately filled with narratives, inventions by African Americans. But see, we don't know these narratives. We are functioning based upon false narratives because as a means of maintaining white dominance, they condition us to perceive ourselves through a marginalized identity that aids them in maintaining their dominance. Now, the reality is this, in spite of cultural traumas, in spite of slavery and racism, white racism, most inventions that revolutionized the world were either invented by a black person or were inspired by a black person. But see, these narratives, most black people don't know. If it wasn't for African Americans, we would not have skyscrapers. This is a fact. Because an African American invented the elevator, the air conditioning, the heating system. If it wasn't for the elevator, the tallest building would be no more than 5 stories high because the average person don't walk more than 5 stories. But you see, we are not functioning based upon our true narratives. We are functioning based upon distorted narratives that falsely exalts the dominant society and marginalizes us. This is a system that's designed to maintain that white dominance is maintained well into the future. Until we recognize the social science, we will never liberate ourselves from it. There's no progress without gaining a full understanding of the social sciences that are being deployed against us.
Franklin, let me ask you a question. Yeah, I understand the fact that until we understand or realize, but based on your research, do you think more and more of our community are getting on code and realizing the okie doke, for lack of a better word? Are you seeing a shift in the paradigm there?
There is. There is. However, we're not, you know why we're not seeing it in the main media? Because social scientists discovered that it was by giving Malcolm X and Dr. King a national platform that allowed their following to grow. They gained more power. So as people, J. Edgar Hoover said, when he said, the next time there'll be a black prophet, we'll create it. So now here's what they do. There are still many amongst us who are able to stand on a national platform. There are many of us who are woke. But what the white society does now is they don't give them a national platform. They treat revolutionary-minded black people like a gardener would treat weeds in his garden. You don't put fertilizer on weeds. You don't add water to weed because you don't want the weed growing through your garden. So the white man today no longer gives a national platform to true black liberation.
But you know what? But here's the deal. When you talk, I look at a number of social movements. I look at, what took place. Again, I mentioned Nagella earlier. They didn't need, we always make reference to the they and what they give us. They didn't need the white man's media to form their movement, to gain their independence between, just that long strip from South Carolina all the way down to the bayous of Florida. So when we talk about the civil rights movement, we talk about that Afro-cultural movement. They didn't have access to major media then. You know what I'm saying? So we've had movements that didn't include them, that just started on the streets where everything begins. So I hear what you're saying, and I think it's really incumbent upon us to create that platform. It's incumbent upon us to grab that pen, that paper. I don't care how you get your information out, get it out. They shadow ban us on Facebook. They ban us on YouTube to keep us from getting our messaging. But the idiots don't realize I'll just start a new page and we'll keep doing it all over again.
Yes.
So we will always find ways to get our message out. When they stripped us from the drum, when they took the drums and said we couldn't play the drums and we couldn't use our native language, we took theirs and we manipulated and coded their own language to the point where there's still things we can say where they have no idea that we're actually talking about them. So I think it's really incumbent upon us to, as my man brother Gary says, we have to decolonize. The first thing we need to do is get them out of our heads, get rid of the they and the them and what they allow us access to. Because if they take me off the radio, then I'm going pirate radio. If they take away this newspaper, I'm gonna create another newspaper. We're doing 5,000 copies.
Yes,
goal to get up to about 1 million if we can. But the thing is, it's getting that information out there, writing the stories. We're still, even in our protests, we're relying on them to write our narrative. Everything that you're saying, it still goes back to they want us, they won't allow, and it's like we should be writing out. There are enough books out there for us to establish our own libraries in almost every major black stronghold across the country. We should be, stop complaining about the schools and pull our kids out of schools and creating homeschool networks and educating our own. I look at that community in South Carolina and going, we need to, folks are, I'm not black, I'm this, I'm not, we need to go back to who we were. We need to explore the Yoruba religion. We need to go back to everything that our ancestors would do. We have to take it all the way back to the foundation. So there's a lot that we can do. And narrative is critical, man. We got to pull, turn off these television sets and stop allowing our kids to watch these little white characters and coming home and wanting to be Elsa and whatever the other girl's name is. We have to pull that, because as long as we continue to allow it, it's crazy. Which is why, we're happy we have you on there, because people need to understand the significance of audio and visual images every day. Even when we think that they're not programming us, they're programming us.
Yes.
And the other thing too, to kind of amplify what Darryl was saying, we don't need anybody's permission.
No, we don't.
As a community in this country, we're at like 1.6, 1.9 trillion dollars. That's a top 12 economy worldwide based on 195 plus countries.
Those are the documented dollars.
Yeah, those are the documented dollars. So I say that to say, A, we don't need anyone's permission, and B, if we practice collective economics, we've got more than enough resources. We got more resources than 180 plus countries.
I think, Rob, I agree with you, but I think more important than practicing cooperative economics and collective economics, I think we need to practice a collective mindset. Yeah. I think we really have to go. We need money is critical, but you know how our folks are. I care less about money at the end of the day. What's valuable to me is the spiritual connection that we each have with one another. Which brings me to the next question. Brother Gary said to ask you the question. Talk about how they use it. This is going to piss some people off. Talk about how they weaponize religion.
Okay. Before I'm going to give me 1 minute. Both of you just said something, and I was going to talk now. I'll go and answer this. I'll come back to that later. Okay. Let's talk about religion. Now, here are the facts. The facts. The early white Christians' conversion of Africans into their faith had absolutely nothing to do with saving the souls of Africans. Right. This is an fact because the early white Christians believed that Africans weren't humans, that Africans had no souls, and they believed that heaven was for whites only. This is a fact. In fact, the early white Christians believed that the thought of an African going to heaven was as blasphemously ridiculous as a dog doing so. This is a fact. When you look at facts as they truly were, you can say with 100% certainty that the conversion of Africans had nothing to do with saving our souls so we may join them in heaven. The purpose was to indoctrinate the belief of a white God into the minds of the African. Once the African is made to believe in a white God, this created an adoration towards whiteness that then subconsciously transfers and transposes upon white people. And Absolutely. The teaching, blacks are taught, put no one before God. Don't put your wife before God. Don't put your husband before God. Don't put your children before God. And God is white. That's power.
What's that old song? What can make you white as snow? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Man, if they don't take that somewhere, you Jehovah's Witness, so you don't know about that. But go ahead, brother.
But here are the facts about it. When you study the Romans who wrote it, first of all, the person who was in charge of writing the Bible was the Emperor Constantine. Constantine, when he died on his deathbed, Constantine was the one who added Jesus to the Bible. He the one who created the story of Jesus and added to the Bible. It was an ingenious scam because by creating the narrative that Jesus was the key to heaven, this meant that the church literally held the key to heaven, which gave the church immense power on earth. But the person who added Jesus to the Bible himself refused to convert to a Christian. He died without doing so. Now, you would not accept a meal prepared by a chef who refused to eat his own food, and also when you study the Romans engaged in massive orgies, bestiality, sodomy, incest, and death sports, and they continued these practices long after writing the Bible. Now, when you combine these facts, combined with the fact that the Bible strongly condones slavery, these facts totally disqualifies the Bible from being the true words of God. And the way the Bible was introduced to Black people, it was introduced to us through brutal. Now, can you imagine the true words of God being introduced to a people in a manner in which it was introduced to us? We are programmed to believe things, and we now fight to defend those beliefs, but the beliefs are asinine. The beliefs are ignorant, but we get offended. The world is so confused under white dominance that telling the truth now offends millions. But we must still always speak what is true. Because in order for our people to liberate, we must function based upon what is true. Because if our understandings are flawed, all remedies that stem from those understandings will also be flawed. So we must fight against the ignorance. Our problem is that the ignorant ones are overconfident, and the intelligent, insightful ones are filled with doubt, or they don't want to debate against the ignorant ones.
Right.
And this has allowed the idiotic ideologies of the ignorant to prevail through our communities. Like the narrative now that we are the true, they're saying we're the true Native Americans. And it creates division between us and the Native Americans. But here are the facts. The ancient bones that they found in Native Americans, their DNA does not match ours. Their DNA are consistent with those who we know to be Native Americans. Also, countless millions of African Americans have had DNA analysis, and those DNA analysis come back saying that we are Africans. It's funny when people are brainwashed, they don't look at facts. They ignore all of the facts. It's ridiculous. It's like in the age of information, ignorance is now a choice. But we must speak against those who are ignorant, regardless of how brainwashed they are, because we owe it to our people. We are in a position to free the minds of our people. We are in a position to free the minds of Africans who haven't been born yet by pushing against the falsehood, pushing against the ignorant. We using our intelligence, learning, researching facts, and functioning based upon those facts.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah, Franklin, one of the things that you just said that one of the things you just said that hit me in the face was in the information age, if you're just ignoring the facts, that's intentional.
Yes, your ignorance is not
a lot of people
choice.
walking around just, intentionally being misinformed and miseducated, and they're fine with it. It's that whole matrix thing, the blue pill.
But let me flip the other side. There's still a penalty that comes along with espousing Black truth. Destabilizing families by arresting your economic development. It's real, and it's like the same people you're trying to help, the same people who align themselves with you. They're not there when you push that truth out there. You're trying to educate your people and save your people, and next thing you know, you're trying to figure out where you and your family are going to sleep. So there are people who think twice about it. They go, "Well, trying to save them is it really worth the quality of life that I'm going to sacrifice for my family?" And these are real questions that we have to ask ourselves, no matter how people look at it.
Robert, you are 100% on point, Robert Jones.
No, I'm Daryl. That's Rob. Rob the big
one.
one.
I'm sorry. Daryl, Daryl, you on point. What you just said.
You're right. I'm 100% on point.
Let's check. Okay, Daryl.
Yes.
Daryl?
Yep.
I met many, I talk to people in the Atlanta area who are social scientists. I speak to educators in universities, and they agree with what I'm saying, but they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come on programs. They will support my efforts, buy my books, but they don't want to lose their great jobs. Okay, and I also went and I talked to many of the civil rights leaders here in Atlanta, the historical ones, some of the older ones, and here is how they're controlled. They get funding from the U.S. government. Okay, if they start going into a direction that the government disapproves of, they can lose their funding.
Absolutely.
So they're okay to talk about cops killing Black people, but they cannot talk about the social engineering of our people. But here is why this is so important. We must, Nellie Fuller says it, until we overcome the monopoly the oppressors have over our minds, our liberation is impossible. Because the fact that we have billionaire Black people who are doing nothing for the community, because their minds have been socialized to think of what it benefits the white society. Right now, if we go and we start speaking against the white society, there are Black people who come to fight us because they've been conditioned to think in ways that benefits the white society. Their minds have been socialized. So
and the crazy part is these folks, the conditioning is so brilliant.
Yes.
You got to give the enemy credit.
Yes.
It's so brilliant that these people consider themselves to be pro-African, pro-Black, and have no idea that everything they do is anti-us, is anti-life, and to the point where we idolize cats who make millions off the exploitation of our people.
Yes, the denigrating of our people, and we
look down on folks like yourself, Dr. Umar, Tariq Nasheed,
yes,
and all of whether we get along with them or not. We look down on them, and we uplift the people who don't contribute any type of intellectual or emotional value to our community. That's the irony. Their strategy is so brilliant, it may be remembered for centuries to come. It was brilliant. How do you conquer a people? How do you get to the point where you can control the mindset from Africa all throughout the diaspora. They got us. We have Africans who call themselves Patrick. My name is John and Brad, and it's like they're disowning their family names that go back for centuries and taking on these European names along with their European religion. We got folks lightening their skin in 2022.
Yeah, billion-dollar industry.
So it's kind of like when you look to home, you're like, okay, when I look home, I look back at Africa, yo, they got to know more than we do. Then you interact with them and they're dealing with the same stuff that we're dealing. You alluded to it earlier.
Yeah.
We're the bottom of the barrel. We're thinking they're the bottom of the barrel. And it's like the whole time, these other folks are manipulating that we are like the world's, you want to talk about natural resources. We are the natural resource. That's what
Yes, we are.
Mm-hmm. We're the gold you can't buy. Well, they did buy us at one point, but we're the natural resource.
Yes.
You know how underdeveloped this world would be if they did not exploit our expertise in an array of fields. So folks have to embrace that and digest that to free themselves. Like, I don't know, it's crazy. Stop being afraid of being called a black identity extremist.
Oh, yes. They throw those narratives on us. We try to run from those narratives. But once we understand how they weaponize these narratives against us, they lose their effects. Once you recognize, it's like when you watch a musician doing a trick. Once you see how the trick works, it loses effect. So we must educate our people. Our people must be educated to what's being done to them. That's the solution. It starts with educating their minds.
And showing the success of brothers who have decolonized their minds and showing that, listen, they survived anyways. And they're doing well. We have to show almost the same way they don't have just one approach to program us. We have to have, our approach to decolonizing us has to be multifaceted as well. And some folks are so caught up in that either this or that and nothing else. It's absolutely insane.
Yes.
It has to be multidimensional.
There's a video on YouTube, and I recommend people look at this one. It's called The Century of Self. Mm-hmm. It gives you lots of information to give you the foundation of the system that we're now under. Now, the system that we're now under, it goes back to particularly the Tavistock Institute of Human Behavior. You're familiar with it. They now call themselves the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. They changed the name because it's more socially acceptable. But when you study their early origins of the organization, it was one of the founding members was that they call him their greatest prophet. His name was Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. He was the first mass manipulation expert to use the studies of his uncle Sigmund Freud for controlling the masses. And when you go back to those studies, you understand the system we're on. For example, many years ago, during the 30s, it was considered taboo for women to stop to smoke. So the tobacco industry realized that there was an untapped market that they could get millions if they get women to start smoking. So they hired Edward Bernays. He did a campaign to get women to smoke by calling it a torch of freedom. The heck with men. And that program got millions of women to start smoking. Also, bacon and egg, which is a staple of the American society today, was not common breakfast back in the 1930s. It was Edward Bernays who did a propaganda campaign to get Americans to start eating bacon. When they started putting fluoride in toothpaste, there was a backlash because it was a known poison back then. So they hired Edward Bernays to start spreading out propaganda to get people to start to find fluoride acceptable. Even when you go into the story of propaganda to get people to remember the story of the director did a movie called The War of the World, and it got the people running around doing all kind of crazy things. Are you familiar with this? That's 1942.
Okay.
Austin Wells. There was even a study done based by the ruling elites about how you can control people by information.
Right.
So the white society controls the narrative, and that's their power. Yeah. They control the narratives, and all the narratives exalts them and marginalizes us, and that's how they maintain their power. And we function based upon those false narratives rather than the reality.
Along with their own people. Because
Yeah. Oh,
imagine the
yes.
danger if they're on. That's why they're so afraid of the CRT. And it's like, what are you afraid of? Even the dumbest white boy know enough not to teach black folks about black folks.
Yeah.
And if we don't know about us, we assume we went to school with. I mean, for those who went to integrated schools, we know that they don't teach nothing about us.
Yes. No, they don't.
Not on the elementary level, the middle school level, the high school level, or the collegiate level.
They do not.
So
They do not.
we have teachers. We got this guy I used to work with in the mayor's office. He had a master's in history, and funniest little guy. Tried to tell me that Robert E. Lee was he supported black humanity and black rights. Are you serious? And then he says,
Idiotic.
the Louisiana Purchase didn't come because of, the French losing the war to Haiti. It's like, brother, what books were you reading? So my point is, if you can graduate get your degree in history, get a master's in the same subject, and you still know absolutely nothing about the impact of black people in this world, their own folks are being manipulated. What happens?
Yes. They believe they're superior.
Right. Imagine if the vast majority of these ignorant, broke, poor, back the same folks who lost out with that Obamacare because they were the primary beneficiaries of it, but they were complaining about it. Imagine if them folks woke up one day and realized, wait a minute. Everything they're saying about those people are not true. And I can care less what they think. But I'm just saying, can you imagine what would happen if they woke up and realized that they've been being fed lies?
Yes, they are. The collective self-esteem of the white masses has been falsely bolstered at the expense of the collective self-esteem of the black masses.
Superman complex.
This creates...
The minute they get hit, they get suicidal, collectively suicidal, because they can't take it. Our success is their kryptonite.
By exalting whites and marginalizing blacks, this creates false assumptions within the society that a society functions based upon facts. And these assumptions aid in maintaining white dominance. These assumptions affect hiring and firing. This is why social science says perception is more important than reality, because people function based upon their perception rather than reality. So merely perpetuating the perception of white superiority gives the white society immense power over black people.
Absolutely. Which is why you have the homeless guy who will look at you with his nose turned up. I look at the little dirty little monster who murdered those people in Buffalo, New York, little piece of white trash.
Yes.
He talked about how he wouldn't have felt bad if he would have felt better if he had known that all those black folks he killed were thieves and hoodlums. But then he says, they got this. You heard about that displacement theory.
Yeah.
Where about black folks are displacing whites in all these white countries. So a lot of these people subscribe to this mess based on the same information that we're learning about ourselves to make us hate us. It's empowering these people to be the monsters that they are. I had to sneak that little piece in there. But this is critical. But go ahead, man.
It's so true. Like, for example, like I said, our perception is a white deception.
Yeah.
Like many people function based upon the narratives that the largest recipient of welfare are black women, but we know the truth is that the largest recipient are white women. Many people believe that the greatest benefactors of affirmative action are black people, but the truth is the greatest benefactors are white women, and therefore, by extension, the white family. And many people believe that most inventions that revolutionized the world came from whites, and black people are the leeches of society that are benefiting from the great minds of whites. But the reality is, most inventions that revolutionized the world were invented by black people.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for a black person, we wouldn't have the refrigerated truck that takes groceries to the grocery store. We wouldn't have the cell phone. We would have the internet. But the white man distorts narratives to
mass production.
Himself.
Mass production never would have happened without Congress.
Never. But if we knew our true narratives, this would scare the white society. This would erode their dominance. This is why they push against it. Like many people say, why do white people keep insisting that the ancient Egyptians were white? Why do they keep insisting? That's also a social science. Everything is a social science. Let me explain the social science behind that. According to white social science, a people functions based upon the history they're taught about themselves. And people, inspiration are inspired based upon their past achievement. So if people doesn't have a past that exalts them and inspires their future, the white society creates a past. They whitewash the past. They remove themselves from the caves of Europe and place themselves upon the thrones of Africa, because doing so elevates the mindset of their people. But here's the reality. Carbon dating testing performed on the ancient kingdom has scientifically proven that the ancient kingdom is thousands of years older than before the Arabs and the Greeks arrived during the 7th century. It was built by Africans thousands of years. These are facts. DNA analysis performed on Ramses III, Ramses II, and several other Egyptians has confirmed that their DNA analysis are consistent with sub-Saharan African. These are facts. But you see, the white society don't give a darn about facts. They've distorted facts to better fit the system of white supremacy. Right. So by distorting the past to exalt themselves, that people walk around with a sense of superiority. It inspires the future aspirations of their people. And then to attack the aspirations of Black people, they tell us it is we who don't have a significant past. Right. It's a social science. We must understand the social science. Like the narrative they created. The white society created the narrative that they are the highest evolved Homo sapiens that turned white due to migrating to the colder climate of Europe. And in all of their charts, from the primate chart, they place white skin on the highest level and place Black skin on the lowest level. This subliminally conveys the myth that whites are superior and Black people are lower evolved. But do you know DNA analysis performed has demonstrated that Caucasians are not African albinos, but that their white-skinned animalistic hair type are the result of Neanderthal DNA. The entire ancient history we've been taught has been distorted to exalt whites and marginalize us, and we function based upon those distorted narratives, thus maintaining white dominance. This is, as long as they continue this is how they maintain their dominance well into the future. And the only way it stops is when we educate our people, recognize it, and develop counter strategies against it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna put it like this. If I was alive to win this bet, I know I would. 500 years from now, Martin Luther King was actually a white man who came to save Negroes. Just like the Lone Ranger, or the Lone Ranger was a white guy who hung around with the Indian dude, knowing damn well the original Lone Ranger was black. Bass Reeves was black as I am. Yeah. So they are the classic case of historic revisionists.
Yes.
There's a science what they do. I mean, I think the greatest trick the devil ever did was make us think he was some invisible entity and not the person we see when we walk into the supermarket. But that's neither here nor there. Listen, we got about 10 more minutes. I was going to stay here till midnight, but I got daddy duties.
I understand.
But here's what I am going to do. We're going to make this a two-part, brother, if it's okay with you.
That's fine, my brother.
Because I know we just really tapped the I know you only tapped the surface.
Yes.
I can see your eyes looking at, you making sure you're trying to hit all your points in your paper. I can see your eyeballs moving like, okay.
Yeah. I love my people. I love Africans. I love everyone who loves us. I love everyone who has the mental fortitude not to be brainwashed by the white society.
Exactly.
I tell people, I never say negative narratives about Black people. You know why I never do? Because I realize that all narratives about my people and all maybe images about my people that I see are controlled by my enemies. My enemies control it, so I don't say anything because it's my enemies control it. Most of us are not conditioned to realize it's our enemies, and they benefit when we believe less about ourselves.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Franklin Jones. He's the author of The Black Matrix. Order that book. Read that book. He has a YouTube channel. Some of the most incredibly profound thoughts you will ever hear are on that channel. Make sure you follow him. We will work out. I'm going to get with you and Brother Gary. I'm thinking next Monday we break in new music. So I do music and talk. But the Monday after next, if you're available, I would love to have you come back on for part 2 and let's get it in.
No problem, my brother.
That our people need. This is food. So thank you,
my brother.
Thank you.
Thank you, Franklin.
I'm honored to be here. Whenever I'm called to speak, I always come. because we have to teach our people. We have to spread the truth information. We must.
Right. We have an obligation. We go to meet our ancestors, man. I'm not going to be the one to say, I had an opportunity to get that information out there. I'm sorry I didn't.
Yes, yes.
We're going to go before our ancestors at some point, and man,
I agree.
that accountability is real.
Yes.
So with that, thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man.
I thank you for having me on. Thank you very much. I look forward to returning.
Thank you, sir.
All right, sir.
Have a good night.
Good night, my brothers.
This is 90.7 WTCC FM. My name is D.Moss. That's Rob Jones. And listen, man, we got some things to talk about. We got some guests that will be coming on the show. My brother Gary Porter has a bunch of brothers and sisters that we're going to have on. Mm-hmm. So we about to turn the heat up a little bit. So, Rob, we're already getting critiqued for, doing this on the platform. You ready for it, man?
Yeah, I'm ready. I mean, hey, the mascots are always going to be the mascots. So everybody can't get the message.
You know what?
And that's all right. Everyone can't fit on the boat.
But somebody, oh man, listen. I was trying to find the perfect song to play, but I don't. Do I have it on there? By Kaba the Soul? Oh my God, Kaba the Soul Singer. What is? I got to get it. Everyone ain't gonna make it.
Everyone ain't gonna make it.
Yeah,
you know what? That's fine. Just don't waste your time on those that ain't gonna make it. Find the ones that are open to it and that are gonna make it and understand what being on code is all about. And work with those folks. Yeah, we got to kind of treat like special forces at this point.
All right, there it is, y'all. This is 90.7. I can't find the track that I wanted to play, but we're going to play the track that came up. This is my man, Dre Zounds, y'all.
For a country that treats me cold, there's my skin like it ain't the crown I hold. You bold, cruise,